Welcome to the Providence College podcast. I'm Stacia Walmsley, your guest host for this episode. Today, we are talking to Alison Espach, Associate Professor of English at Providence College. Her second novel, Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, was published in May. NPR named it a Best Book of 2022. USA Today chose it as a must-read novel, and it was an Indie Next Pick for June of 2022. Alison, welcome to the PC podcast.
Thank you so much, Stacia, for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
First, I have to say that I was really taken with this novel, Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance, and its characters specifically. The media reviews and accolades for the story really reflect, I think, how affecting it is on its readers. Can you tell us a little bit about how this novel and the story came to life?
Yeah, well, thank you so much for your kind words about the book. An author always hopes that someone uses the word resonate in terms of their work. And so that's great. I've had this idea. I had this idea for the book for a long time. And sometimes when people ask me how long I've been working on, or how long I had worked on the book before it was published, I often say a decade, which is really terrifying to a lot of aspiring writers. Right? They don't want to hear a decade, but to be more accurate, I would say I worked on it on and off for the course of 10 years. So I had the initial idea, and just to give readers a sense of the plot for anyone who isn't familiar with the book, I had this idea about a young girl, 13 or so. I ended up naming her Sally Holt. She's the protagonist of the story, and she's infatuated with her older sister in the way that a lot of younger siblings are. Right? You sort of worship the ground that they walk on, wear your hair the way that they wear their hair. You dream of doing the things that they do, and this was very much the case for Sally with her older sister, Kathy. And so I had this concept of a relationship, and became really interested in what would happen to Sally if Kathy was taken away, right? What happens to her development? Who does she become without her older sister as her guide? The question that I was asking about Sally, like what would happen to her without Kathy in her life, the question I was asking was a question that came very much from my own personal life. I experienced a very similar tragedy to the character of Sally, lost a brother when we were teenagers, very suddenly in the night. And so, I was a teenager who woke up the next morning, and the first thing that I heard was, your brother is gone. Right. And that was a very, to put it mildly, a very startling experience for me. And one that took me decades to process, right? Not just the grief of it, but just the reality of it, right? That the sudden death. And for the book, I cast it, as a disappearance, not in the mystery sense. The reader kind of always knows what happened to Kathy, but just in the sense of, if you're someone who's experienced a sudden death of a close loved one, it can very much feel like a disappearance, right? All of a sudden, that person is just not at the table anymore, right? All of a sudden, that person no longer has a phone or no longer answers your messages, right? And so I think the real desire that I had as a young person was to reach out to my older brother and somehow communicate to him what was going on, right? Because it's a very odd experience to lose a sibling, especially one who's very close to you in age and just sort of maturity, that all of a sudden they're taken very seriously by everyone because they've died, right? That people use the terms angel and spirit, and this kind of ethereal language that really never matched my actual perception of my very alive, sometimes gross older teenage brother, right? And so I just had this longing to like bridge that gap, right? And to say, hey, Mike, like you wouldn't believe what people are saying about you, like, and you can't really do that, right? There's really nowhere to go with that kind of desire. And so I think what I did with it was I wrote the book. I never really found a satisfying way to kind of communicate with my older brother in whatever way that would be satisfying to me. And I think writing this novel and creating Sally as a character and watching her try to do a similar thing, right? And the idea of notes on your sudden disappearance is really what that gave rise to, right? This idea that the whole book would be cast as a direct address to Kathy, right? Here's what happened after you left us, right? Here's what happened to me. Here's what happened to mom. Here's what happened to dad. And I think some of the tension of the book really becomes just like, will there be a response, right? And if there's no response, what becomes of Sally?
With the safety concerns around the pandemic abating a bit, there has been opportunity, I'm sure, for you to be able to go out and do some readings and meet readers. And I'm wondering if there are questions that are recurring during these sessions where you're meeting with readings, just the response to the book overall. But I also imagine that you're hearing from folks who have very similar experiences in terms of loss and grief, but also the way that you paint Sally and the experiences she has in a very realistic, from a very realistic point of view, not necessarily one that is perfect all the time. And I think I imagine readers who might have experienced similar losses in their life are appreciating that, but I'm curious what you're hearing.
Yeah, it's been really wonderful to be able to go to readings, actually see the readers or the audience, and have a conversation about the book and all the things that the book brings up for both me and the readers. So that's been really, really nice. And I don't think I anticipated how nice that was going to be, actually. I think when your book comes out, your dominant feeling is apprehension mixed with like a lot of excitement, right? But the apprehension of, how is the world going to receive this? Does this resonate? One of the scary things of being a writer, fiction writer in particular, with fiction, you can almost never sell it on proposal. So you really have to write the thing. You have to spend years with the document. You have to believe in it in some way in order to spend that much time alone working on it. And so I really was alone with that book for so many years. And I just never imagined, right, what it might feel like to no longer have that be the case. And so really, my very first reading, I did a book launch in Madison, Connecticut at RJ Julia, one of my favorite bookstores. And I was overwhelmed, but that I was up there talking about both the book and a grief that felt quite personal to me for so many years. And that people were listening, and it was sort of what my teenage self, who couldn't yet talk about it, or who felt alone, very alone with her grief, and felt that every time she did try to talk about it, it didn't come out the right way, right? It's a very difficult thing to talk through your grief, especially while you're having it. But it's a very lonely thing to not be able to do that. And so I think that first reading was really everything my younger self would have wanted, that finally, here I am with the words to reflect on what happened, not just to me, but my whole family, and people are looking at me and nodding and asking questions and responding, and not shutting down or not walking out of the room or saying not now, Alice. Like
Yeah.
in the when you're grieving with a family, one of the difficult parts of that is that everyone grieves differently and at different times, and that's something that I really wanted to get through in the book, and to have a public reading for me, it felt like everyone was in the right place at the right time, right? And that it was a great vehicle for people who really needed to talk about it, to be able to talk about it. So I wasn't anticipating that being an emotional experience for me. I was certainly anticipating it being an exciting experience, and one that I had been looking forward to for a long time with this book. But it was very cathartic, and I think it's something that I will always look back on as one of the most important moments of my life, I think. Not just my career, but really just my actual personal life. So
That's really wonderful. And like you said, the catharsis there, you paint the character of Sally so well, but then the people around her who are also experiencing loss and grief in very different ways. But I also have to say that the kind of the time period of the novel, happening during the 90s, for the most part, I think I'm getting that right. I will say that a lot of the cultural references, again, I'll go back to the word resonate, certainly resonated with me as a reader, and also brought me kind of like joy, and there was some tongue in cheek and stuff in there about being a teen during that time period. And I'm appreciative of that myself as a reader. I wonder if you've heard some similar things, and if that was just natural based on your own experiences, that they just kind of emerged as part of the writing of the novel.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely emerged as a natural part of writing the novel. For me, they were touchstones in my own life. Having taught at Providence College for quite a while now, I've become more and more confident that I am losing touch with what it's like to be a teenager right now, right? I think it would actually be quite a challenge for me to write a teenager who exists in 2022. I wouldn't really be familiar with the touchstones or with the references. I just learned yesterday in my class that apparently it's cool to tie shoelaces around your jeans as a belt.
Oh,
right. I mean, and those are the kind of details that in life I don't really need to know. But as a writer of a kind of current day teen, like I would need to know those things, and those things those would be research for me right now. So I do find myself kind of always going back to the 90s for better or worse, and try to conjure up the feeling of that decade, what it was like to sort of form your consciousness in that decade.
sure.
What are some of the technological changes going on? What are some of the technological changes going on that would really shape you or change the way you relate to the people in your life or the people in your grade? And that was fun for me. I liked going back to think about the development of AOL and instant messenger, and how that created a whole different kind of conversation between teenagers, and how that shifted into email and created a new kind of conversation, and then finally gradually moving to the telephone when you were ready.
Yep.
Right. So that kind of stuff was fun to think about and fun to play around with as a writer. And yeah, I have heard, from every now and then, a reader says, "Oh, the Oregon Trail,"
Yeah, right.
I too was obsessed with the Oregon Trail. because that's what we did in computer class, right? So so that's fun to know that that some of those experiences or some of those songs or some of those games that I played, right, that they were really a kind of universal experience for anyone who was growing up in the 90s.
And your first book, The Adults, that was a New York Times editor's choice selection. It was a pretty significant achievement for your debut novel. I know it got a lot of other accolades and great reviews. How did some of that early success that you had with your debut novel influence the process of writing this novel?
How did writing The Adults influence writing this novel?
Yeah. And some of the and just the experience of writing a novel that was so well received as your first novel, and then, thinking, okay, what's next?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I have a really kind agent who did her best to prepare me as a debut novelist. For silence, right? She was like, I was 25 when I published The Adults, or when I sold it at least. And she was, she kept saying, I love this book. It's going to go out into the world. Just know it's so hard to be a debut novelist right now, So she was really trying to manage my expectations to keep me from getting disappointed. And I totally bought that. I said, yes, this is the right way to go into this. Just be happy that it's published. And so pretty much anything that happened after it being published was just like, it felt like this thrilling bonus. And just really almost like a dream at certain points, particularly the New York Times editor's choice pick was huge for me. I mean, that was so meaningful. So I was a little overwhelmed that anyone beyond my mother read it. And then all of a sudden felt extremely exposed, right? Because I really wasn't prepared for that. So, and it's, definitely not a complaint, just more of an observation of what I can see going on now when I look back at that time, right? Just feeling suddenly very exposed. And I think that state made it very hard to write. I wrote The Adults in some ways truly believing no one would ever read it. And I think that's what allowed me to write it in a way. And when you go into your second book, you're like, okay, it might not sell, it might not get out there, but you have you have more of a actual belief that it will. And I didn't quite know how to navigate that at first, to write always with an audience in mind, always thinking about how it was going to be received. And and there was a lot of praise for The Adults. There was also a lot of criticism, right? And I think both things swirling in your brain, right? For me, I just needed some time to stop listening to those voices, and even positive feedback can be not damaging to a writer, but just something to learn how to deal with, right? In the way that if your first book is praised for being whatever, one of the things that I kept seeing in reviews was reviewers being surprised by how funny it was, right? And so I go to write the next book, and all I can think is, make it funny, make it funny. It's got to be as funny as The Adults, right? So, and no one's ever funny under those conditions. So
on demand and
yeah, right. Yeah. So I was just assuring myself a very a non-funny book by thinking that way and obsessing in that way. So so I think when I talk about the book taking 10 years, I would say the first few years that was part of the process of just writing something and then giving it up because it wasn't right, or because I was writing for some other reason other than I just really want to write this thing, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't probably until about 5 years after the adults that I got so sick of thinking that way. And I got really tired of it too.
Mhm.
And I started to feel like I fell back into obscurity for a bit. So that actually helped a lot. I just felt like I was writing to myself again. And it turns out that that's really the only way I know how to write. Just wanting to write the thing that I think I would like to read.
So in teaching students now creative writing, you're a faculty member here at PC. You were an English major at Providence College, undergrad, right? And then went on to an MFA program at Washington University in St. Louis. In teaching students now, has the craft of writing changed, or should I say, is what you advise in terms of the approach to the craft of writing, has that changed at all, from what you might have learned as an undergrad to what you're helping students to navigate right now?
Yes. So yeah, I was an English major here at Providence College, and it has changed in the sense that when I was a student at Providence College, we didn't have a full creative writing program the way that we do now. So our students can major in creative writing. To be honest, I can't quite remember if we could minor in it when I was a student here. I don't think we could. So it was really, we had great professors, or I had great professors, Professor Jane Lunan Perel and Professor Peter Johnson and Chard Denord. And they were extremely helpful to me, both as a writer and as an aspiring writer, like someone who wanted to make a career out of it. They pointed me always in the right direction. But because I wasn't taking that many classes, I think I took about 3 creative writing classes while I was here. It always felt like an introduction to into the world.
Yeah.
And I didn't really come from a family. I don't really come from a super artsy family. So it really was my first, I've always wrote on my own, but I had never been part of a workshop, or I had never studied a contemporary short story in a class. So so everything was just new to me and bewildering and awesome. So I don't think I could speak to sort of whether the teaching of it has changed, right? Or if I do anything different. I think part of me can hardly even remember it. All I can remember is my total enthusiasm for it, really. But I do think that having a wider variety of classes, right, having the major, does change the student experience of it, right?
Oh, sure.
By the time they become seniors or they're in one of the advanced workshops, I can see them notice things about their own work that it took me until I was, I don't know, 28 to notice about my own work, So, and I think part of the process of becoming a writer is not just improving the writing. I mean, obviously that's a huge part of it. But it's learning how to see things differently, or maybe learning how to observe more acutely, and learning how to have confidence in your own observations as something that matters, or as something that is significant. And I hope that's one of the things, if not the thing, that students take away from my creative writing classes, right? I mean, of course I want them to know how to like use a metaphor, right? But I more so want them to leave with the feeling that what I observe, what I see matters, and with the confidence and the ability to actually put that on the page and send it out into the world. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but
No,
hopefully.
it helps to understand, really what the program's like here, but also what your how you're able to guide students, because I wonder, certainly I'm curious at what point in your life you decided, I think I want to make a career out of writing. And I imagine even those students who are in creative writing programs at PC or are taking creative writing classes, they may still be skeptical about moving in the direction of making writing a career. So I'm wondering if you could tell a little bit about what led you down that path, and if you are seeing some of that maybe struggles with that choice among our students today.
Yeah, so it's funny looking back now. I didn't go into my college experience thinking I would come out of it as a writer, even though since the age of, I don't know, 6 or 7, I always had a novel in progress, right? They started off as like 2-page novels and became much larger. It was something I always did and loved to do. And it's really eye-opening to me that I went into college not even considering it, like it wasn't even a possibility. The closest I came to thinking that way was, okay, maybe I'll be a journalist or, get some kind of practical career, right? And it took taking my fiction workshop with Professor Peter Johnson to open my eyes to what some of the career possibilities actually could be. And I think that's a pretty typical experience that a student has with creative writing, unless the student comes from a family of writers or
Sure.
a family that is like really pushing them in that direction, and has already given them the vocabulary and the understanding of what that kind of career might look like. I think most students come into it having no idea that it's a possibility and not even really being able to imagine the steps, right? If you interview 20 writers and ask them, well, how did you become a writer? Their stories are going to be wildly different from each other. It's not like
Sure.
becoming a doctor or a lawyer where you're like, okay, at least I know like what application I'm supposed to fill out and where I'm supposed to send it, right? You don't really like fill out an application to become a writer. You just have to write the thing, right? And that's easier said than done, especially if no one in your life is telling you to become a writer, right? Like no, I don't think I've ever had a student who's come in and sat in my office and said, my parents are really pressuring me to become a novelist, So I think I always assumed that to be my responsibility as a writing professor, that if I saw a student who really wanted it and a student I thought could do it, it would be my job to start introducing them to some of the steps that they can take, because there are practical steps to take in order to become a writer, right? Going to graduate school is one of them, but not the only one. Working in publishing or moving towards journalism in many ways. So there are steps. There are things that professors, I think, do need to introduce their students to, and I try to do that as much as possible. For me, it took Peter Johnson saying, "Hey, did you ever consider graduate school?" And I thought, "What? You can go to graduate school for writing?" And then I thought, "No, I do not have the money to do that." And he said, "They will pay you to go." And it sounded ridiculous. I couldn't believe that such a possibility could exist. But there are many graduate programs in creative writing that offer stipends and make it possible for you to just find some time, right? And for me, that was really one of the most valuable things about a graduate program. Yeah, of course, I learned a ton while I was there, but it's also really meant to give you the years that a person needs to actually create a manuscript. It's very hard to create a manuscript while working a 9-to-5 job and doing a million other things. So So for me, it was my professor's kind of encouragement with the actual experience and the time that the graduate program gave me.
Mm-hmm.
And also the fear of what would become of me once I had to graduate, right? So I published very early. And that is not typical of most writers, I think. I think it's scary. Like when I tell my students when I publish my first novel, they get scared, like, oh no, I'm not ready. It's very normal to publish your first novel when you're 30 or 45 or 70, right? There's really no age requirement for such a thing. But I just knew that if when I graduated and had to get a job, like I was never going to be as focused on the manuscript as I was at that moment. And so my goal became, as soon as you're done with this program, you are going to get this manuscript ready for publication, and you're going to send it out before you start your job. And I feel very fortunate that worked out for me. So yeah, it probably wasn't until a few years later where I was actually starting to call myself a writer, right? So it's a weird, long, windy process, one I could never have predicted when I started, which is why I think it is important to if you're interested in creative writing, to be a part of classes and to be a part of a community that is always teaching you and reminding you what's possible for you as a writer.
And I think having a community of people who are writers to help have that common language, like you say, and understand the possibilities and understand the options and understand the timeline, which might be very different than other types of jobs, and how that all works, I think is key. One of the things that I think is interesting right now is the emergence of the audio publishing market. And I wanted to ask a little bit about how you got into working with Audible and the Audible original short stories that you've been working on. And I'll just your series, I think, is called In-Depth Market Research Interviews with Dead People, which is sounds really fun. And I'm looking forward to digging into that myself. But tell me a little bit about how you got involved in audio publishing and what you think about this as kind of an emerging opportunity for writers to dive into.
Yeah, so I in-depth market research interviews with dead people. Next time I'll make sure my title is always something I can easily say out loud without thinking too hard. That was a story that I wrote in graduate school, or just at the tail end of graduate school, when I started to pick up some jobs for money, right? So start figuring out, okay, well, how am I going to pay the bills once the stipend is gone? And I used to transcribe market research interviews for companies. So the company would do hours and hours of research with interviews with people about the products, and then they would send me the DVDs, and I would transcribe them. And it was both fascinating and like mind destroying for me. I mean, it was so boring, and yet it was the best education I could have gotten in sort of people's speech patterns and the little things that they reveal about themselves while talking about anything, right? I mean, these people were talking about the car that they bought, or they were talking about the Hannah Montana backpack that they bought, and yet I felt actually by the end of each DVD, I knew everything about them, right? And I knew the foundational experiences of their lives and what made them tick, right? Because when you talk about things, even, you just can't help but reveal who you are. It's sort of what I love about dramatic monologues, right? You think you're hiding things, but actually you're not. And so, once I started to have to work these kinds of jobs, I was so, in a way, resentful that it was taking writing time away from me, and in such a boring way. I tried my hardest to figure out how to I was like, this experience cannot be wasted. I will write a story out of it. So I wrote this story for a workshop, and I just didn't know what it was. It was weird. It was kind of like a play and not really a short story. It was an interview between two people. One of them was dead, and my workshop was like, good, but why do they have to be dead? And I was like, they have to be dead. I don't know why. They just have to be. But I really didn't know why. And so I just let the story sit for 10 years, because I was like, that was just a weird thing I had to do, like, to process my awful job. And then when I was going up for tenure, I had to look back through all my old stuff and really think about, like, okay, is there anything I really want to work on again? And a lot of stuff I thought, absolutely not. That's garbage. Goodbye forever. And then I stumbled upon the in-depth market research story, and I just thought, like, what a weird little gem from the past. And all of a sudden, rereading it, it clicked. Like, I knew why they had to be dead. I knew how that created a certain kind of humor that wouldn't really be there if they were alive, and sadness, of course, but it's primarily meant to be comedic in a way. And I just could see the whole thing. And so I rewrote it, and I sent it to my agent, but I sent it to my agent being like, I still have no idea who would publish this.
Yeah.
And she suggested Audible. And I didn't realize that Audible was really seeking that kind of content, but they are, particularly stories that would, for whatever reason, work really well read aloud. And obviously an interview would be that kind of story. And so I sold that story to them, and then we just we tried to develop it into more of a series. And I used the initial concept to come up with 2 more interviews, I believe, Bounty, Paper Towels, and Tempur-Pedic. And it was fun. That was one of my more fun projects alongside the novel that I was writing, which felt very intense for me. So I'm a strong believer in that it's always good to have 2 projects going at the same time, like one that's just fluff and one that feels like your main project. And I think it is really a new opportunity, right? That people really do listen to audio stories now in a way that they did not even like 5 years ago,
Yeah.
So I think there's a whole new market for it. And it doesn't necessarily have to change the way you write your story, but I think it is a great generator for new ideas, right? As writers, as fiction writers, we tend to be so focused on just how the reader will read it on the page, but it's fun to think about what might happen if you start writing, thinking of it more as a monologue that might be read aloud, and playing around with those new possibilities. And because I loved it so much, I am very slowly working with a professor here to develop a course in sort of oral storytelling.
Oh, very cool.
Thinking about the different ways you could have students try out something like an Audible story, but also telling stories on stage and whatnot. So I'm really looking forward to that. And that's all really a product of this unexpected work that I didn't realize I'd be doing as a writer.
And is Notes on Your Sudden Disappearance on, is there an audiobook?
There is, yes.
And did you read it?
Great. I did not.
No, you did not.
I didn't read it. Yeah, no. Gosh, I have endless admiration for audiobook voice actors. Holy moly. The narrator for Notes is wonderful. I've listened to a bit of it, though I think I need to give it some time.
Yeah.
I just reread the book like 1,000 times to get it ready for publication.
Oh, I can imagine.
So yeah.
What classes are you currently teaching? I said, that you're working on this kind of audio reading class or audio literary class, but what are you teaching right now?
Right now, I am teaching in the Development of Western Civilization program. as well as a seminar in the prose poem, which is a hybrid form, a poem that is prose or prose that is quite poetic. It's a very, very short form. And it's one of my favorite classes to teach. The students don't have much experience with it before they get to class, but the form, I think, really brings out something special in what they write. Peter Johnson used to teach this class to me when I was a student. It was one of my few creative writing classes, and I remember he said, the prose poem's great because you can write without feeling like Shakespeare's sitting over your shoulder. There's really not much of a tradition of the prose poem that extends past like the 70s. So there's something about the freedom, the total freedom that they have, and the super short form that keeps them restrained. And it just creates these little beautiful pieces that they keep stunning me with every week. So that's been really lovely. Next semester, I'll be teaching a fiction workshop, as well as a literary nonfiction workshop, which is a course I developed here. And that course was based on my experiences writing nonfiction and selling nonfiction as a way to survive as a writer in my early 20s and mid 20s. So that course is really designed to help students come up with ideas for magazine-length nonfiction, something you'd find in the New Yorker or the New York Times or forgetting the name of any magazine right now.
The Atlantic or something like that.
The Atlantic, Harper. Thank you. Jogged my memory. And how do they take those ideas, draft them, research them, revisit them, rewrite them, workshop them, and then think about pitching those ideas to an editor. And that class really, I hope, more than some of my other writing classes, prepares writers at PC to actually leave and start working as a writer. So I really focus on the transformation from having written the thing. Okay, now what do you do? How do you pitch this to an editor? What does it mean to pitch to an editor? And we work with that a little bit.
And you said that you're teaching in the development of Western civilization, what we call Civ here, the good part of our core curriculum. Is that a colloquia you're teaching?
This semester it is 201, so it's the third semester of the regular Civ program, and
Got it.
I do teach a colloquium with Dr. Christina Rodriguez in the spring. We've been teaching it for about 5 years now, 6 years. It's called Me, Myself, and I, the reading and writing of autobiography. And that is another one of my favorite classes. We read autobiographies. Professor Rodriguez does what a literature professor does with books, right? She teaches the students how to approach them and unpacks the books with the students and analyzes them. And then I offer paired writing exercises where they imitate these works and try to slowly work toward writing their own kind of mini autobiographical essays. And so that's the final project at the end of the semester. And it's very surprising to Civ students that they get to do a little creative writing. So it's really fun to introduce that to them at the very end of their Civ careers.
I imagine after the first 2 semesters of Civ where there's not a lot of creative writing, that's something third semester to be able to do that is pretty exciting. I imagine it's a pretty popular class.
I hope so. Yeah. I mean, it is there's some confusion at first with like, wait, what? You want me to write about my mom? What does this have to do with Civ, right? So it's
not St. Thomas Aquinas, right?
Yeah. So it's fun to make that connection, that unexpected connection between what's going on in their own lives and everything that they've done in Civ thus far.
So I just want to end with two quick questions. One of them being, what are you working on? And the other being, what are you reading?
Good. Good question. I am working on a new novel and I'm halfway through it. Hopefully it won't be another decade-long experience, but I think I hope I'm past that. And I would describe it, but I am under strict orders to not say a word about the
Okay.
plot. So not that it's super exciting. It's just we're not talking about it quite yet. But I'm really into that at the moment. It's been a lot of fun for me to work on this summer. And what am I reading? I am mostly reading Civ books, to be honest. And right now that's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Just having read the Communist Manifesto, obviously by Karl Marx and Engels. So a lot of Civ books, a lot of prose poetry at the moment, though I am at night when all the work is done and I'm just trying to relax. I've been reading Sheila Heti's autofiction called Motherhood. I really loved her first book, How Should a Person Be? That was her first novel. And loved it. I love her writing. And so far, Motherhood is just wonderful. I'm getting a lot out of it. So,
well, I think that's really important as a writer to be able to continue to find the joy in reading, right? Like, and find those moments, especially when you're so busy writing yourself, teaching, all that good stuff. So, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and sometimes you're a little too tired to do it, and you just want to not read more words at the end of the night, but every time I pick it up and convince myself to read just a little bit for fun, it's so worth it. I think reading is one of the best things that we can do to remind ourselves of why we write in the first place. For me, that's absolutely true. So I need that. I need those reminders. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Alison. It's been such a pleasure having you on the podcast. And I know personally I'm a big fan, and I'm excited to hear more about what your next novel will be about when it's ready to be disclosed. And I hope you'll join us again when it comes out.
Well, thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this edition of the Providence College podcast. And thank you to our producer, Chris Judge. I'm Stacia Walmsley. Check in on Mondays for new episodes available everywhere you get your podcasts.